Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. It's been a while since we've done a video and that's because of work issues and all that sort of carry on, so I've not been able to get on the bank a right lot, but past couple of weeks I've managed to come up here on a couple of Sunday matches on the opens where the bottom lake here at Sunrise is pegged in the middle lake as well, so there's another one this Sunday. So long story short, I'm here to have a little match practice. The first time I've actually had a chance in this sort of little series to do a practice session, so I've picked a peg that's actually been in form. Long story short, on the past two matches I've drawn the section which is on the bottom bank down there, so I know that area quite well, so if I do draw it then I've got a good chance of remembering what to do and that sort of carry on. I've not actually drawn this bank here, nor have I drawn the middle lake. Now this is an area that's sort of been in a bit of form in the matches and there's been some half decent weights caught, so I've basically come here today to have a plumb around, suss out a few things, suss out my feeding and basically get prepared for Sunday, and hopefully I do draw this area and then I'll know exactly what I'm doing. But the sort of things that we'll go through today will carry into the other lakes, or the middle lake, and equally on the bottom section here as well. So basically my plan of attack, I'll run you through it now. I'm going to fish basically two long lines if you like. One is more of an edge line if you like towards the reeds, which is going to be chop, worm and caster, looking for bonus fish, perch, better stamp, roach, etc. And I've got a long line which I've basically split into two if you like, and I'll explain the reasoning behind that when I'm fishing. It's 11.5 metres and 13 metres, so I've basically fed two lines in close proximity with a different ground bait mix. The theory being that if carp come into the peg then the fish have got somewhere to back off that's not too far away. Another feed area basically, so I can rotate between the two just by adding a section and dropping the same rigs over each one. So we'll have a look at the bait that I've prepared for today anyway. So the first mix I've got is my skimmer mix. It's in the bucket here, so it's a bit of a pain to get down to, but basically that's half fish meal, swim stim black and half Sense Magic black, so quite a rich mix, and I've loaded that with a load of these F1 dynamite baits, micro pellets, 2 mils. That purely is there as a skimmer line, so I've got a few expanders knocked up as 4 mils, and in terms of the feeding, that, like I say, it's rich in micro pellets, and I've just got a few casters, few dead pinkies and quite a bit of chopped worm. Again, quite a skimmer orientated approach. The risk being there, because I've got the micros etc in there, could be that I do draw a lot of carp into that area, which again factors into why I've put in the second line quite nearby. So that's been fed at 13 metres and I've put 3 balls in there. A section shorter at 11.5, I've put in a roach mix. Now this is equal parts Gross Guard on, Sense Magic black again because it's a mix that I do quite like to use for roach, and Frenzied Hempseed black, so a completely different mix, really active, fizzing up in the peg, basically to draw everything that swims into the peg, so lots of activity from small fish. So if I'm basically struggling for skimmers and sort of bonus fish, I've got a roach line that's nice and active that I can just keep ticking over and getting bites on. So that's the theory with that. In terms of the worm line, I've fed it as you'd expect with chop, worm and caster, but what I've actually done here is made a bit of a mix because it's quite deep, so you'll see when I go through the rigs it's about 5 foot deep. I actually mix in sedge peat in that, and I put in Baitex liquid worm into that, so basically it's almost like a ground bait. But there's loads of juices in there, and it just means that it all gets to the bottom where I want to catch the fish. I'm not a fan of fishing right the way through the water all the time because I think you do miss a lot of bites, and if the fish are there you want to make the most of them. So that's the theory with that, and I've just put one big 250ml pot of that in against the reeds. Worth pointing out as well, I've already started the session probably about half an hour ago, so like I say, I've put in 3 balls long at 13 metres of the skimmer mix, 2 balls shorter at 11.5 metres with the roach mix, and then a full pot of the chop, worm and caster down the edge, and then I'm just going to loose feed casters over the top of that. In terms of the rigs I've got set up, as you can see I've got quite a few here. I've got seven kits set up, and they all do sort of different things, the theory being that because it's table flat out there, I can basically change my presentation over every single one of the lines to try and sort of get an idea of what's in the peg and how to catch the better fish. So I've basically covered all my options. So the first rig is sort of a really nice light roach rig. This is a rig that I should have set up in the match on Sunday, where sort of the last hour it was incredibly difficult and scratching for bites, and on the more positive rigs that I'd got I just wasn't getting the bites, so a rig like this would have been perfect. So I'll run you through the top end. It's a 3 elastic, which is very light to be fair, but again, if I'm sort of scratching for fish, I might be catching really small fish and I don't want to lose any, so nice light elastic, set fairly pingy. I've got an 010 main line, a Sense, I think it's an Eric type float there, which is a 0.2, nice fibre bristle, wire stem, small back shot behind it. And then down the line, sort of in the bottom, sort of 1.5 foot, something like that, I've just got 5 number 11 strung out, and then an 095 Drennan Suplex fluorocarbon hook length to a 20s Gamma Black. So a nice light rig, that's just for fishing maggot through the water, like I said, if I'm really struggling for bites. And this, because it's the same depth up against the reeds, because I've fished at the same length, I can use that down there as well. Hopefully we won't have to use that rig too much today. The next 2 rigs are basically the rigs that on Sunday when I won the section from the peg opposite, did most of the work for me. These are basically my bread punch rigs. I've got 2 set up. I won't show both because the variation's on the same, just one's a 416s and one's a 414s. Number 4 elastic in the top end of both, an 010 main line again, a couple of back shot and quite a long line to be fair, just means that I've got more control if the wind does pick up. The crucial thing with these is I've got a pencil style float Sensus SA2, so it's a nice thin hollow bristle, and like I say, these are what I use for bread punch, so I'm fishing these bang on dead depth. Shotting pattern you can see really nice and positive. I've just got a bulk on this with a little kicker shot there and 2 number 11 droppers. Again, the hook length's 095 Suplex fluorocarbon, and that's down to an 18s Gamma Black. On the 414s it's a 20s. Again, shot is exactly the same but just a slightly lighter float just in case. So like I say, those are the rigs that I expect to catch most of the fish on today. The idea being that the fish will go down to the ground bait, that's where they'll be feeding, and then I can bomber bait down to them and catch them really quick. But the rig itself is actually still quite light with light droppers, so there's a bit of finesse there. The next 2 rigs, again, I've just got variations on the theme, 416s and a 414s, but these are my skimmer rigs. So the 416s, well, both of them have got a number 6 elastic in the top end, again a long line and back shotted, but the floats in this case are a Sensus Jean-Francois, which is a much more rugby ball style float, more useful in towing conditions and for laying line on the bottom. Like I say, if I'm targeting skimmers and better fish, that's how I want to present the bait for them, whereas roach, you want to bomber bait down and just catch them pretty much either just off bottom or just on. So this one I've got set, which is the 416s, I've got set about 3 inches over depth, the other's just an inch over depth. The only difference with these is the shotting patterns on the 2 rigs. So the main line's a bit beefed up, it's 012. On this one I've got a bulk and then I've doubled up on the droppers, so 2 number 10s and 2 number 10s. And like I said, that's fishing for lift bites, so that one, the final drop will be just off bottom, about an inch or so. Again, 5-inch hook length, again like I said with Drennan Suplex fluorocarbon, but a 16s Gamma Black. On the 0.4 or 4x14s version of the same, all I've done is I've just got the 3 number 10 droppers spread out a little bit more, so a slightly more natural fall, but the same principle, like I say, fishing over depth for skimmers. And then finally, the rigs that I'm going to use on my chopped worm line. You can see there's a bit of a theme here. I always set up sort of duplicates that are just a slight variation so I don't have to modify the rigs through the session. Both of these are Preston Chiantis. I've got double 5 elastics in both of them at the top end. And both of them are 4x12s. Again, long line and back shots, as I keep saying. The slight difference in this is the shotting pattern. So on the slightly heavier rig, if you like, where I've got a 16s hook, which is a Guru Kaizen, lovely hook for fishing worm, because of its beak point, it doesn't, and sort of curve point, the worms don't seem to come off as easily. But on this one, I've just got that bulk spread about an inch apart, so it's more for lifting and dropping directly. The other one, and like I said, that's more for worm and double caster. The other one, I've just got the shots spread out probably 2.5 inches apart. This is more for laying in with maggot and caster on the hook, or a smaller section of worm. The hook lengths on these are slightly stronger to match with the elastic. That's a 10.5 Suplex fluorocarbon, and on this one I've got a 20s Guru Kaizen. Again, something to just bear in mind is I've upped the gauge of the hook, the wire of the hook, to go in line with the elastic, and especially if I'm catching against reeds, not only if I hook one of the big perch or say a big roach or skimmer, I've got more purchase on it and I can bully them away from the snags. But if I'm catching a lot of small fish really quickly, then I can swing them to hand, whereas on the much lighter rigs I'll be netting those fish. So it's a pretty quick run through. With the sort of worm and caster rigs, I've got them set about an inch, 2 inches over depth, something like that. So like I say, because I've already been fishing, I'll get back into the water. I've just got to top up my worm line, and then we'll have a look over that, and then hopefully the ground bait lines should start to come good. What I'll do in the match is I'll feed my ground bait lines and leave them for sort of half an hour to an hour while I look for bonus fish early and try and establish what's feeding in the peg, and then, like I say, once the fish have settled over the ground bait lines, hopefully catch them on the positive rigs nice and quick, and then just rotate the line. So that's what we'll be doing today. So it's pretty straightforward, and like I say, hopefully we'll get a good weight in the net. So we'll turn around on the box now and get fishing. Right, so like I said, we'll carry on with the session now, because we've wasted about 10 minutes there, so I need to top up my worm line. So all I'm going to do is just put in a very small amount of the chopped worm and caster mix that I ran through. One thing that's worth pointing out that I may have missed in the intro is that the matches that we're doing on the Sundays are silverfish only matches, so that's why we've gone for all of a natural bait approach, and like I said earlier about trying to avoid catching the carp. I'm just going to put a small top up in on that worm line, and then we'll have a quick look over it with a dendrobina for about another 10 minutes, and that'll mean it's an hour since we potted in on the ground bait lines, so they should start to come good. And all I've got on here is about 3/4 of a dendrobina, which is a good sized bait to catch roach. And like I say, if there's the bonus perch or skimmers down there, that should pick them out as well. When I started off initially, like I say, I cupped in my ground bait, cupped in on the worm line, started immediately over the worm line on that lightest ridge with a number 3 elastic, and I had probably, well, I had 5 roach and 5 chucks, all about sort of 3 ounce. Then I switched over to the heavier rig with a section of worm, and although it took longer for a bite, I ended up having a roach about a pound. So I'm just going to bring the bulk in line with a far bank marker and then lower the float in. Again, something to bear in mind, because when I'm fishing on the opposite bank, you're basically fishing, if you like, in white water. That was a fish on straight away. You're basically fishing in white water, whereas here the sun is behind the trees, so you get a dappled effect on the water. So it's important to bear in mind when plumbing up to find a nice sort of dark area of water that you can feed in. Not only that's got a clean bottom, but like I say, where you can see your float. And what I've also done is I've plumbed around the reed beds just in case I have to move this line, say light conditions become really difficult. I've plumbed again a section shorter and a bit tighter into the reed beds, just so if the light conditions do get worse or the fish move or whatever happens, I can go in there and basically draw the fish from the same line where I fed into a slightly different area. Something that was very apparent in the match was the fish were very cagey. I caught most of the fish around the feed rather than directly over the top of it. So it was really important, like I say, to move the rigs around, chop and change between the rigs and chop and change between hook baits. So today you'll see on the side tray I've got a real selection of, there was a fish on there, I've got a real selection of different hook baits. One thing I didn't mention as well in the roach mix, I've put quite a lot of hemp in there. Again, a good holding bait for roach and plenty of oils in there. I don't intend to fish anything other than maggot or possibly castor, or even if it gets really difficult, pinky on the hook over the ground bait lines. Again, because there's quite a few small fish in here, you want to make sure you're fishing a nice durable hook bait just in case they are a problem. And there we go, that's fish on the worm. First perch of the day, that one. Again, something that you might question is using a really thin bristle float like a Chianti for fishing with worms. I've even fished them with lobworms. But the reason being because there's not much tow on the water, so I don't need a thick top float to sort of hold back against. So by fishing sort of 3-4 inches over depth, the bottom's taking all the weight of the hook bait, say if it's half a lobworm in an instance. But it means that when a fish takes the bait, because it's such a light, thin float, not only am I quicker on the bite because it's a thin float, so I'm striking through less of a body on the float. But equally the fish will feel less resistance, which, as we know, for big perch is really important. One thing you'll see, that's a slightly better fish on now. Could be a perch, this. One thing that you will see is I've got the floats all dotted down to an absolute pimple, which, when it comes to fishing for silverfish, oh, it's just fallen off as that one. When it comes to fishing for silverfish, especially in the middle of winter, is crucial. That could have been a £1/2 perch, that. So I'm just going to pick out a section of worm. We'll try again. It's interesting, initially when I fed that a large pot, there were a lot of small roach in the peg. And then as soon as I've topped up, it looks like 1 or 2 perch have cropped up, so I think I might well try the lobworm. Obviously with fishing a lobworm or a bigger bait, you've always got the risk of carp, which, you know, is one of the reasons why I've not gone really tight to the reeds. Because in winter, as we know what happens with carp and F1s, they tend to sit in reed beds, and that's why dobbing's so effective for them, sort of in the deeper water near a feature. So today what I've made sure is I've come well away from the reeds where the bottom's dead flat and clean, and that's where I've fed. Like I said, what we'll be doing with this line is I'll make sure I keep loose feeding casters over the top. Because perch are quite sort of visual feeders, they need to see a bait moving or baits falling through the water. And it'll just keep that line ticking over. It also means that I don't have to get out the big pot constantly to keep topping it up. To keep that line ticking over, I can loose feed my chop worm and caster sort of bonus fish line while I'm fishing my, my ground bait lines. Unless I've put on a slightly smaller section of worm just to see if there's any roach down there. There's another fish on now. So if this is a perch or a skimmer, I'll probably go onto a bigger section of worm. That's a big roach, is this? I think that's a lovely fish to catch. Definitely sort of 10 ounce, that one. You can see just nicked in the top of the top lip. Again, it was interesting, the match, because those sort of fish didn't really show, to be honest. A lot of the fish were caught with small fish, sort of 2, 3, 4 ounce, something like that. Right, so we'll try a slightly bigger section of worm again. Just nipping the end off it. And I must admit, I've just only recently started using these Guru Kaizen hooks as a barbless pattern for fishing on commercials with worm. And I can't fault them, to be fair, especially because they've got such a wide gape on a 16s. It doesn't, sort of with even half a lobworm, it doesn't sort of mask the hook too badly. Like I say, because of the really sort of unorthodox shape of them, I've got quite a lot of confidence when you do get a bite that the fish will stay on, especially with worms where they can double over the hook point because it's quite a wide gape hook and very sharp. You've got every chance of keeping that fish on. Whereas a more traditional sort of like B911 type pattern, I found not only do the worms come off, but like I say, if the worm doubles over and masks the hook point a little bit, there's not sort of anything in the pattern that keeps the fish on quite as well as these Guru ones. So again, I'm just going to put in another pouch of casters Looks like there's quite a few fish down there, and especially if those better stamped roach down there, they can go through quite a lot of caster, so I need to keep that bait going in. So straight away with this line I can pretty much write off having to use the really light rigs. Again, in match conditions the lake's always going to fish a lot harder, but a little practice like this just gives you a bit of confidence in rigs, get used to a couple of pegs and, like I say, suss out how best to fish them and feed them. So again, just going to lift and drop. One thing as well that's worth a mention is using quite a light hook length for this sort of fishing with a slightly heavier elastic. Again, in matches, if you are hooking big carp, it's better for them to sort of shoot off straight away and then break the hook length before they get into the reeds and get snagged up. So I'll always fish a slightly light hook length, so say a 3, even a 4 pound perch, I'll be able to get in on an 0.10 hook length. But if I hook sort of a 5, 6 pound carp and it shoots off, it should break the hook length before it gets into the reeds. And they shouldn't have any issues spitting out a barbless hook, so it's something to bear in mind when you are fishing in a silverfish match and you're fishing up to reeds like this. The other side of that is obviously your bait presentation's a lot better for the quality silvers. So we'll give this another sort of 5, 6 minutes, something like that, see if the float goes under, and then we'll go on to the ground bait line. And what I will look to do, because it looks like there's a few fish that are in that area of the peg, is I'll top it up again. It's a bit of an indication there. Right, so I'm not going to waste too much time on that line now. We've had a couple more minutes. Like I say, the hour's pretty much up now since we fed the ground bait line, so I'll give the worm line a little bit of a top up. And I'll probably have a look on that again in the next half hour, just for a couple of minutes at a time. Like I say, I think if there's a bonus perch there or a big roach, they'll probably have the bait pretty quickly. So I'm just going to put a small handful of bait in, and hopefully by now over the ground bait lines a few fish should have settled. Wash the pot out because, like I say, with that sort of sedge peat slop that I've fed, it does stick in the pot a little bit. So make sure the pot's nice and clean, you've got all that bait in the water. So I think what we'll start off with is the 4/16 rig, which is the rig that I caught most of my fish on Sunday. Again, if I'm struggling for bites, I can always go down in the rig size. Like I say, if I'm after some skimmers or some better fish, I can pick up the heavier rigs with the bodied floats. So I'm just going to start off on a single maggot. I'd be surprised today if there's any need to go on to pinkies. And with these rigs, in the same way with bread punch, basically drag the hook bait across the surface with the bulk. As soon as the bulk gets in line with the far bank marker, I can just drop the rig in and it'll settle straight away. Like I say, if there's any fish there that are feeding on the ground bait, then you should catch them pretty quickly. There you go, that was a bite there. A small fish on. Again, fishing a nice positive rig like this. That's a nice stamp roach. You're straight into the fish. As soon as you get a bite, you miss very few of them. And that was the sort of stamp of fish that we were catching in the match on Sunday. You could see how clean that bite was, and as soon as you strike with these pencil style floats, there's very little resistance, so you can get away with a slightly lighter elastic. And that, interestingly, was right over the top of the feed, whereas on Sunday most of the fish I caught between sort of a foot and 3 foot away from it, which just goes to show how different it fishes under match conditions when there's sort of 14 pegs on the lake in. So you can see just how quick that float settles. There we go, biting another small fish on. And there were quite a few of these to be caught in the match. But I think a lot of it isn't so much the sort of choice of hook bait, it's how you present the hook bait and equally how you're feeding. So when I'm fishing on here, I prefer to fish, especially in a match, a non-selective hook bait so I can catch everything, and then suss out what the best way of presenting that rig is, rather than say fishing sort of double casters or sections of worm or whatever it might be and sitting there waiting for a bite for sort of 10-15 minutes. With a maggot, you're going to get a bite. You're more likely to get a bite off whatever's in your peg. Again, that settled nice and quick, and another fish on. So you can see if you keep up doing this for 5 hours, hopefully get a few better stamp fish in the peg, you can very soon build a weight, even catching fish like that of sort of an ounce and a half a piece. Again, something to consider as well is that I could have fished shorter today. In match conditions, the fish tend to sit a lot further out from the bank. So basically I'm fishing exactly the same sort of range that I will do in the match on Sunday. So it's more a case of just getting used to shipping out, cupping in ground bait long and all that sort of thing. Again, I'm sure today, because there's not the pressure on the lake, the fish will come closer in and feed closer in. But as I say, it doesn't take long to build a weight. If you can catch one of those every sort of 2-3 minutes, it should be well on for £10 by the end of the day. But one thing that I found from fishing the first match, where I fished sort of strung out rigs just to get bites, is I was having to wait ages till my rig had settled and the bait was where the fish were feeding. A lot of the fish, because it's so cold, have been feeding sort of in the bottom 12 inches of water. So it made a huge difference switching from strung out rigs to these sort of bread punch style bulk rigs when it came to fishing the match on Sunday. And also that was one of the reasons why I avoided loose feeding over my ground bait lines, unless the ground bait line went absolutely dead night to draw new fish into the peg through loose feeding. It was much better just to top up a little ball and then see if the fish turned up. Because like I say, then you're pinning the fish to the bottom where your rig's presented. There's no point feeding sort of a heavy ground bait mix that's stays sort of dead on the bottom and then fishing a strung out rig over the top if you're not loose feeding. So that was my thinking. And very quickly, because my bait's always fishing in the same sort of bottom 10 inches of water, if the fish are out of the peg, then I'll know really quickly, so I'll just stop getting bites entirely. So while I'm fishing like this, I'll quickly explain sort of my line of thinking behind feeding 2 ground bait lines really close. As you can see, that's why I've got my 30 section on, but I'm only fishing at 11.5. Is if suddenly bites stop on this line, and I think there might be, say, an F1 or a carp in the peg, I can just basically ship straight out onto the longer line, or vice versa, come back in short, without having to change the rig, replumb, or do anything. It takes 2 seconds to just drop the rig in over one line and drop it in over the other. Like I say, if it looks like the carp's come in the peg and it's unsettled the fish on one line, they've only got the length of a section to go before they can settle over some feed in a different area. And because you're not going to get sort of 10, 15, 20 carp crop up in your peg at any time, or you shouldn't do this time of year, it'll be just 1 or 2. The carp can just sit over one of, you're basically more likely to have a carp or a couple of F1s over only one of the lines. So like I say, it's all about keeping the fish in a general area and then being able to fish around it. Interestingly, on Sunday I did catch quite a lot of fish directly between the 2 lines, and a few of those were slightly better stamped skimmers and roach. It's basically fishing on the middle of my 13 metre section, halfway between where the sort of fish that will tend to sit off the back of your feed. So say they're off the back of the near side line, they might just be picking 1 or 2 bits off from the long line to dropping in and around that area. You can basically keep picking fish off all day. And say, if you imagine if you only fed 1 ground bait line, a few carp came into the peg, the fish scatter, they don't really have anywhere to go. They might well go into the next peg, for example. Missed the bite that time. Already, after I've had sort of 5-10 fish on this line in the past sort of 5 minutes or so, looks like they might be slightly unsettled. So what I'll probably do, if I miss a bite or don't get a bite for, say, half a minute or something, I'll just go that section further out with exactly the same rig, and I can present the same bait over my long line, which is more geared towards catching skimmers. But it looks like today we won't have to go any lighter than a 4/16 rig. So I'll just try over the 13 metre line and just see if the fish have backed off there. So especially when the water's clear and you catch a few really quickly, they can spook the rest of the shoal, and as I say, by having that line a bit further out, they've got somewhere to back off to. That was a bite straight away. So what we'll do is I'll just tip this with a pinky and just see if that makes a difference. Again, on Sunday I had quite a few fish doing that, just fishing a fluoro maggot or a red maggot tip with a pinky. Just occasionally brought a better stamped fish. So again, we'll try it over the shorter line first, and then we'll go on to the long line. A small fish there, so I think what I'll probably do is top up this shorter line. The stamper fish hasn't really improved while I've been catching them. So again, that bait's good for another fish. We'll try it over the long line this time. Again, in the match, if the fish are being really cagey, it might be a case of just picking one fish off over each line so as not to spook the shoal, rather than just sort of hammering one area for half an hour or whatever it might be. And then making them dissipate. So by feeding like this, it just gives me plenty of options. The other thing worth mentioning as well is on the long line, what I've done is I've actually made the Groundbait much more of a stickier mix, so it's got a much slower breakdown, which I find for bigger fish can tend to be the better way of going. That was a little indication there. So it might be sort of 2-3 hours by the time 1 or 2 skimmers crop up, which was the case on Sunday's match. So because I've got my floats dotted right down, I'm just going to add a little bit of bristle grease just to make sure they're keeping up above the surface tension. But today, unsurprisingly, I'm getting a lot more bites and a better stamp of fish than I was on the match on Sunday. So today, I won't be surprised if we get sort of 10-15 pound when we're weighing at the end of the day after 5 hours. But as ever, in match conditions, the weights are always going to be a lot lower. So this time I'm just going to try slightly to the left of the feed and see if there's any better fish sort of hanging off it there. So on Sunday it was a case of fishing sort of 3 feet away from the feed, you get sort of 2-3 bites, then you go over the feed, possibly nick a fish, and then you go to the left and there's another indication there. At no point were all the fish sort of shoulder up over the feed and you were getting constant bites. As I say, most of them were caught away from the feed. So they've come to the noise and the attraction of the feed, but they know they're getting fish for, they're not daft. So they weren't sat over it and feeding confidently. It's looking like it might be a slightly slower start on that long line. So again, because I've fed a little bit more than I did on the match on Sunday, that's purely because there's less anglers here and the fish should feed better, so I've put a bit more bait in. I'm not too worried about leaving that safe for an hour and a half or so before I properly start fishing over it. But it's worth just having a quick look and seeing, because occasionally you might have a shoal of skimmers might turn up and within the first hour and start feeding. Doesn't seem to be the case today though. And there's definitely more fish feeding over the roach line. Could be the case though that there's a carp over that long line. But usually you'll hook them probably within sort of 2-3 minutes of fishing over it if there's a carp there. At least I know now after the first hour it doesn't look like a load of fish have turned up over that long ground bait line, saying that this is a slightly better fish. So I'm not too worried about leaving it for an extra hour or so, just for the fish to gain a bit more confidence, and then coming back onto it in half an hour's time. But this is a slightly better fish, this. Could be a skimmer, or it could be an F1. It's a nice little skimmer. So these are the sort of fish that you're after in the match, sort of 6 ounce, 5-6 ounce, something like that. Just hooked nicely in the bottom lip. And these are the fish that you can build a real weight with. So it seems to have been sort of worked as predicted today. That long line looks like there's skimmers there, which is why I've not had as many bites. So clearly they've pushed the roach out, and the roach are on the short line. So I think I'll try again for the skimmer. So again, just a red maggot tipped with a fluoro pinky. And it shows the difference. I've used exactly the same rig and hook bait. Over the long line I've had a skimmer, and on the short line I've just had a couple of, well, quite a few roach and no skimmers. So I'm making sure that all my lines, I'm basically keeping tabs on all my lines all the time and keeping them fed when required. And if I don't get a bite in sort of 5 minutes from a skimmer or a roach on this long line, I'll come back a section and I'll try and catch a couple of roach fairly quickly until the skimmers hopefully settle on the, let's say, on the more rich mix that's more geared towards them. Getting a couple of little indications there. So it looks like there could be 1 or 2 in the peg. And if they do turn up in numbers, then I can go on to a much more positive rig and potentially looking for a bonus skimmer on a heavier rig, like I say, that one with the much heavier droppers and fishing over depth, possibly with sections of worm. A bit of an indication there. There's definitely very few roach over this line, otherwise I'd have caught them pretty quickly. So this is what I was referring to earlier by fishing sort of, like I said, a non-selective bait. If the roach were there, then I would catch them. There's quite a few small indications. It looks like there could be a few skimmers swimming into the line. So what I'm going to do is have a quick switch over to one of the more positive rigs. Say with a bodied float fishing over depth, I'll probably start on the 414s and just see if I get a skimmer on that. So like I say, because that float's set at dead depth, it's bobbing under all the time, so there's definitely fish in the area. But I've got a feeling that it's a case that there's not many roach there, it's probably skimmers. So again, I'll fish this with exactly the same bait as I said, a non-selective bait, so single red tipped with a pinky again. And we'll see if there's another skimmer down there. Just keep an eye on it as those droppers settle. And one thing that's worth mentioning with these sort of more skimmer type rigs is I like to fish nice positive droppers. There's a bite and a fish on straight away. So they might seem like quite heavy droppers for such a fine fibre bristle, but it means you get a much more positive indication when you do get one. See what this is. It's another skimmer. So straight away after changing the rigs, I've caught another one of these sort of stamp skimmers, which these are real weight builders. So if I can get these going in a match, those are what I want to be catching. Again, probably going 2 roach to the size of one of them skimmers. You can see as soon as I've changed the rig there, it took hardly any time to get a bite. And this is what I mean about, rather than using the hook bait to be selective, which you can do obviously, is using the presentation of the rig. I'm happy with how the rigs are presenting, how they're fishing, and I'm happy with how the bait sort of worked today. So like I say, in a match I'd probably just refine it down, maybe feed a little bit less, and just go for exactly the same sort of system of starting on that chop worm and caster line, letting the ground bait line settle, starting on the roach line, and then just having a look on each and just wait until the skimmers crop up long. Definitely quite a few fish down there now, so it might be the case that sort of in the next 10-15 minutes I switch over to the 416s rig and possibly even fish sections of worm for skimmers. It looks like there's a few fish down there now, so there's a lift bite. Possibly another skimmer on. Lovely little lift bite there. Certainly feels like a skimmer. On Sunday I had a couple of F1s that fought exactly like skimmers, and so I'd put money on it, and this could be one of those. Got a puller kit on here for the 6 elastic, so I can bully the fish if I need to. That looks like a nice skimmer. That's a lovely fish. It's definitely going on for £1, that one, and these are real weight builders. So I think that might be the way to build the weight today, is catching skimmers over that line. Possibly sort of 10-12 ounces, maybe £1. See, like I said, with that lovely lift bite there, you might have been able to pick it up on camera. Again, that was just on a maggot and a pinky. So we'll repeat the process. What I want to do is I'll concentrate on this line now, and I won't top up the shorter line, because I want to make sure that the skimmers, you know, make the most of them while they're there. Going to get another pouch of casters over that bonus fish line, keep that ticking over, and I'm going to look to top that up probably every half hour today with just little, well, sort of half pots, if you like, of the chopped worm and caster mix. And if any of the lines, like the ground bait lines, go funny, the plan that I want to put together is, if one of the ground bait lines goes a bit dodgy, I can top it up, have a look for a bonus fish, leave it sort of 10-15 minutes, and then go back on the ground bait lines. So today, and like I will do in the match, the bulk of the fish I'm going to look to try and catch on the ground bait lines. And then if I'm going to say win a section or win the match, that's when the bonus fish line will come into it. So I might, as long as I can catch all day, or fairly consistently all day on the ground bait lines, just nicking, say, a couple of a big perch down the edge or a few big roach, that can very quickly boost your weight. So you want to make sure you're not going to end up nowhere in the section by just fishing for big fish all day, but giving yourself enough of a chance to try and catch them. Again, no indications off roach on this line, so that's really good. So if I do get a bite, I'm expecting it to be another skimmer. It's been 3 skimmers from 3 bites on this line. Again, because I've got quite a varied side tray in terms of what bait I've got on there, I can always switch to, say, an expander or a section of worm if I need to, or even a bunch of dead pinkies. But if I'm catching on a single maggot and a single pinky, it's nice durable hook bait. I don't have any issues sticking with that because it'll catch everything in the peg. As I said earlier, I don't want to be too selective and end up sitting and waiting for bites when there's fish to be caught. So I can keep putting weight in the net, some weight in the net until I catch, let's say, a bonus fish or a better skimmer or whatever it might be. So I think what we'll do now, because we've had quite a good start and it's sort of going to plan, is I think we'll just crack on now, try and put a bit of weight in the net and then give you a bit of an update as to when I look to top up and switch lines.